It's equally wonderful to be in a room of Kimber Smith, so I'm pleased that I was able to talk a bit about Vivian Springford. I'm now going to talk about Kimber Smith. Kimber Smith was born in 1922 and tragically died early, in 1981, at the age of 59. But it's a wonderful and a strong body of work, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't have as much history with the work as much as I have a long appreciation of the work. And let me just talk a little bit about the appreciation first, then I can tell you a little bit about the history. Like one of the great things about art and loving art and being open to art and wanting to collect art and, is you become open to things that interest you or that you want to have on your wall. And Kimber Smith was that type of artist. And it was hard for me to figure out what it was about the work that drew me to it. But when I thought more about it, I was actually reminded of a Cy Twombly show at the Museum of Modern Art. Because Twombly was an artist that I could never really wrap my head around. I liked the work, but I couldn't figure it out. And when I went to the Museum of Modern Art and saw Twombly, I kind of had a little epiphany. And it's similar to my feelings about Kimber Smith. And it was this feeling that there were certain artists who, during the height of abstract expressionism, during the height of Pollock and de Kooning and this incredible masculine energy, and that they looked at that and it was too much. It was too ambitious. It was too heroic. It was just too much. And these artists, in response, scaled back. They left more openness in the canvas. It was more poetic. One could argue there's a touch of the feminine in that work in Twombly, and I think in Kimber Smith, and out of that there's a humility and an honesty and back to authenticity, and a different type of beauty. Not the kind of beauty that hits you over the head as much, but the kind of beauty that you're intrigued by and you have to find. And the Kimber Smith work always felt that way to me. It's wonderful to have Springford and Kimber Smith together because they both come out of a similar generation and a similar feeling of color field. Let me talk just a little bit about Kimber Smith's history, then I'll go back to the work a little bit. But he had his first show in New York City in 1951 at the New Gallery with Joan Mitchell and was part of the early art scene then. But in 1954, his wife began working in Paris as a correspondent for Life magazine, and Smith was friendly with the expatriate artist Sam Francis and Joan Mitchell, and was part of this. Also Shirley Jaffe, who's another artist who I've always admired. And one of we talk about being a revisionist dealer and why sometimes you have to push something up the hill. Sometimes it's also geographic. Kimber Smith was actually much more well known in Europe, showed with major galleries and had museum retrospectives in Europe, and it didn't quite cross the pond as it should have. He did move back to New York City in 1966. He showed at Robert Emmerich Gallery and Robert Elkin. I wonder if Kimber Smith and Vivian Springford knew each other or knew of each other. They both had in common a friendship with Sam Francis. And interestingly enough, Wallace A. Ting, in his 1964 publication, 1 Cent Life, included a Kimber Smith lithograph. So, it's maybe we can find out at some point, but it's interesting to think about. Another thing that I like about Kimber Smith's work, and I'm intrigued by it, and it's actually different from Vivian, is that I would argue that Kimber Smith's work is more iconic. And by iconic, I mean there are powerful shapes that are in these works. There are triangles and squares and circles. And I know that Kimber Smith was interested in African art, and he was also interested in ancient art. And there's something wonderfully esoteric about these primal shapes, diamonds and squares, that create a sense of mystery. I get a sense from Kimber Smith and of Vivian that they were more private than public people. And it's interesting that sensitivity and sensibility would find its way into these works. I think Kimber Smith was also a bit more of a formalist in that, whereas the abstract expressionists would celebrate like the moment and starting from nowhere and just making something happen. And Kimber Smith, as you can see from this fantastic juxtaposition of the work on paper and this painting, was really thinking about the proper structure and form of a canvas. And when he caught it, he would take it to another level. By the way, Franz Klein did that too, so it wasn't all just, but he's a little more formal. Another thing that struck me just tonight coming in here, and maybe even particularly looking at this painting, was as much as Vivian was influenced by Wallace A. Ting and that calligraphic Asian tradition, there's something wonderfully calligraphic and Eastern about Kimber Smith's work as well. So again, I think it's wonderful to be able to look at these two artists who I would argue are important and getting more and more attention, coming out of color field painting, a lot of similar affinities with unprimed canvas. It's a great combination, and I'm glad we can see them together. When Abby asked me to talk a bit about Kimber Smith, who I already said I don't know as much, I thought for a moment, and one of the things that had surprised me in the past is I have a bit of an interest in contemporary art. And the one artist who I followed is a woman, Catherine Kerr, who's here tonight. And early on in talking to Catherine about her work, she told me that, she loved Kimber Smith's work and that it was influential. And I was so surprised that a younger generation artist would know Kimber Smith and much less be influenced, that it struck me. And I asked Catherine to come, and I'm just going to dialogue a little with Catherine about her perspective and how she came. So this is Catherine, and come on up here and talk with me.
So it's funny we're talking about shut-ins and people who have a difficulty being out in the world, and Vivian and Kimber, and it's funny being up here because it makes me so nervous, and maybe it's just because I am an artist and it's difficult to speak in front of all you and be incredibly honest about.
Yeah.
But I think why I love Kimber is because he is an artist, and to help me out here a little bit.
Well, what I will say is that I'll help Catherine out. And just very quickly say that I met Catherine when I was doing a favor for an intern at my gallery who was at Cooper Union, where Catherine, and I went to see the graduate show there. And, it was a polite thing, it's the things you do, and it's interesting, and I'll be honest with you, nothing really struck me. It was all interesting, and I'm glad I'm there, but I turned this corner and I saw two paintings. I just kept looking at them and looking at them and looking at them, and then that night, as I was going to sleep, the paintings were stuck in my head, and I just kept thinking about them, and I woke up in the morning, they were still there, and I called up Cooper Union and said, I saw these paintings by Catherine Kerr, can I get in touch with her? And I got in touch with her, I emailed her, and I met her, and we looked at the paintings, I talked about the paintings, and I bought the paintings, and I've continued to collect her work, and we've become friends, and it's been really good. But there is a kind of openness in your work and a rougher quality, and I'm wondering how you see that in your work.
Well, I think what I connect with Kimber with is his poetic quality, and sort of the pared down, languid, confidence that he has, and it's so, and also feminine. I don't really want to use it so much, but it's so open and conversational, and that's why I think I loved him. And when I was in Paris in 2007, I was connecting with all those Parisian artists, and I think that's probably why I connected to Kimber, probably just through Googling and looking at probably Bernard Fries, and then he's kind of too calculated in a certain sense, but through his history, and then stumbling upon the artists, the lyrical abstractionists that were making art, like Lee Lozano or something, and I started connecting to that. But I think Kimber, for the most part, and it's hard for me to place exactly what it is, but it is an openness and truth. He has a connection to truth that I don't know. Yeah.
I think it's when you talk about it is fascinating how a younger generation can Google something. It is amazing because I did the same thing with Kimber Smith, and the images came up, and I was like, wow, I like this one, I like this one, I like this one. Are there other artists that who know Kimber, or do you think you just kind of like? I think I had one other friend who's like, oh yeah, I have an idea of him, and Amy Silman, who was one of my professors at Cooper, was like, oh yeah, Kimber Smith's amazing, blah, blah, blah. But I think my other fellow painter friends weren't so much into him, but it's funny because at the time, maybe it was like 2010, I got really into Kimber, or maybe even earlier. Maybe it was Prussian because that whole style has gotten popular again, the new casualism thing. And I myself have veered off into a different direction and more kind of deeper, thicker, and less about, I don't have that sort of thing that Kimber has of like a easy poetic style, but I love it, and I think maybe after reading things like Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and all that stuff, it's connected to that. It's simple, but so deep, and I think I read his paintings in an intuitive way. And you can feel it, they're just very real and true, yeah. Well, maybe we can leave it at that, simple and so deep. I think that's good and fitting. Yeah. So thank you to Catherine, thank you to all of you. Catherine, you're great.